Welcome to my course, Game Development Basics, Week 6, Lesson 2, UI Setup. And I want to start the lesson off by just fixing a small mistake that I made in the last lesson. Now, when we collect our currency, we're adding a currency to a bank. Now, the issue is this BP bank is currently attached to the player ship, which means anytime we destroy the player ship, which will happen if the player loses a ship, we'll also be destroying that bank component. And this is not what we want unless you wanted a very challenging game where the currency resets every time the player loses a ship. That doesn't sound very fun to me, so I'm going to fix this so that instead our BP bank is attached to the BP player camera class. In this way, the player will maintain the bank as long as they're playing the game. So let's start by adding bank component to our player camera class. And when we collect this, all we need to do is find the camera, which we already set up as a variable on player ship. And we'll just swap it out so that when the player ship overlaps with our currency, we'll get access to the camera variable, find the bank on that camera class, and then add currency there. And that's really all we need to do to fix this. This lesson should be mostly review if you've been following the course so far. We've set up UI in most of our games, so this isn't going to be any different. But I do want to talk about the UI elements that I would like to have shown. For now, I want to have the player know how many ships they have remaining, the current ship health, and the amount of currency that they have. We'll add more elements to the UI as we continue to develop our game, but I think this is a good starting point for this lesson. And because this is mostly review, I want to set up this entire lesson as a challenge. So my challenge to you is to set up the UI for the elements that I've shown. Now, if you would like to attempt this challenge on your own, you can pause the video now, and on the next slide, I'll show a few hints. And if you want, here's some hints on where you can find those variables. The number of ships was located on the player camera class. The current health is located in BP health component, which is attached to the player ship. And the currency is in BP bank, which we just fixed to be attached to the player camera. So with these hints, you should be able to complete this lesson on your own. However, if you still want a little bit more help, you can go ahead and continue to watch the video and I'll walk you through how I do this my way. And if you remember, in a previous lesson, we had already set up a widget for our HUD, and we were using this to track how long the player had been playing the game. So we can just continue to add to this for this lesson. Let's start by adding a text, and we'll put it down here in the bottom corner. And I just want to create a binding to this. I'm going to call this get currency text. Now, in order to get the currency, we need access to the player camera, which is where we put that bank. And we know we're going to need this for other things. So let's just get it upon construction. So we'll say get actor of class, player camera. And I'll just do an is valid check on this. And if it is valid, let's set this to a variable called camera. And here in our function, let's also do another is valid check, and this will prevent errors. And I want to use a string, and that way I can use an append. And we'll just do number of ships. So this will say ships remaining and then the number of ships. And if we compile and hit play, this will say 2, which should coincide with what we have set as the variable in our player camera class. So that's set up. The next thing I want to do is set up a health bar for our player ship. And for this, I'm going to use a progress bar. I'll put this in the bottom left again. And I want this to fill from bottom to top like this. And the percentage I want to bind to the health. So let's create another new binding, and I'm going to call this get health percent. And for this, we're going to need access to the health component, which is on our player ship class. And we already have that in the camera, so we can just get a reference to it here. I want to do an is valid, because as the player dies, we will no longer have access to this. So this will prevent us from having unnecessary errors when the player's ship has been destroyed. And from here, we want to get access to the health component, and we'll need current health and max health. And if you remember, an integer can only be a whole number, and we want this to be a percentage. So we're actually going to have to transfer these to floats in order to get this to work. And all we'll need to do is divide the current health by the maximum health, and that will give us the percentage of total health. And then we can just drag that into here. And now we see that bar is there. And as the player comes in contact with the enemy ships, the health will be depleted. So now that's working as well. The last thing I want to add is our currency. So I'm just going to add one more text node, and I'm going to put it down here in the bottom left corner. And we'll go ahead and create a binding for this as well. And I'm going to call this get currency amount. And again, our bank is in our camera. So we'll say get camera. Again, we'll do an is valid, and we'll get access to the bank. And we just want to get the currency from that. And again, I've changed this to a string so that I can append it. It'll say currency and then the amount of currency. And as I collect that currency, it is going to add to that currency amount. All right, so now that we got our UI set up, I want to do one more thing that really I should have done in the last lesson, but I think now is just as good a time as any. And that's that when we destroy one of the enemy ships, I would like it to drop some loot. So I'm going to delete these loots from our level, and I want to go to my BP enemy ship, and we'll go with enemy base, and that way this functionality can be added to any enemy. And here, when we do damage to a ship, we check to see if it has been destroyed, and if it is, we just currently destroy it. But what I'd actually like to do is spawn an actor from class, and for right now I'm just going to have this set up to do BP currency, and we'll spawn it at the location of the enemy when it's destroyed. And there we have our currency, and this will allow us to get multiple currencies in our game. And one thing I want to fix real quick, in our loot base, we had it so that this collision sphere was visible. I'm going to hide this now because we no longer be able to see it, because the only loot that we're going to have is that currency, and we can just collect it when we overlap with it. And there's one more thing that I'd like to do, and that's that when the currency is down, I would like it to automatically move towards the player. And the reason for this is I don't think it's very fun for the player to have to go and find that currency every time they kill an enemy. So here in my BP currency, I'd like to create a new event that will move the currency towards the player after some time has passed. So I'm going to start by creating a custom event. I'm going to call this move to player. And in here, I want to create some functionality that will move this loot towards the player. So the first thing I want to do is get actor of class, and this is going to be player ship. Now again, there may be a situation where the player has died and there will be no ship left in the game. So let's start by checking, is this valid? And if it is, I want to promote this to a variable. and we'll just call this player ship. Now we want to move this towards the player. And for this, we're going to use a timeline node and a lerp. So let's create a new timeline. I'm going to call this lerp timeline. And from here, we're going to need to do a lerp. So we'll just add a float track called alpha. And we just need 2 points. One at 0, 0. And one at 1, 1. And we'll do set world location. And I want to use the root component. And we'll do a lerp with this being the alpha. And what I want to do is just get the world location as the starting. And then for the ending location, we want to get our player ship. And what this will do is it'll get the player's ship, set as a variable, and then we'll start a timeline that lerps the location of our currency towards the player over some timeline. The last thing we need to do is call this on begin play, but I'd like there to be a slight delay to this so that way the loot is spawned and then it will start to move towards the player. And for this, I'll use a timer with the event being move to player, and the delay, I'm just going to do it as 0.5 seconds. Now when that loot is spawned, after some time, it will start to move towards the player. And there we have it. So our game is really starting to come together. What I'd like to do next is create a system where the player can use the currency that they're collecting for various things in the game. And to do this, we're going to learn about a new variable type, which is called a structure. So I'll see you in the next lesson.